All right, today we're going to take a look at the red-eared turtle, sometimes referred to as the red-eared slider. So this, of course, is a preserved specimen. In a live specimen, there would be a red marking along this side of the head right here. And the scientific name of this turtle is Trichemis scripta elegans. By the way, before we start looking at any of the specific anatomy of this turtle, a way you can tell the difference between a turtle and a tortoise is that a turtle has a distinctly dorsal-ventrally compressed shell. It's a lot flatter. A tortoise has a much taller shell. Also, turtles have these long, sharp claws you can see on the forelimb and on the hind limb. Tortoises generally have either much shorter claws or more like not nails, but anyway, a more club-like foot rather than this flattened foot. Okay, the first thing we're going to do is take a look at probably the most distinctive feature of turtles, and that is the shell. So we're going to start with external anatomy and work our way toward the internal anatomy. To begin with, the top part of the shell, the dorsal part of the shell, is called the carapace. The ventral portion of the shell is the plastron, and the plastron and the carapace are connected to one another with this portion of shelly material right here called the bridge. And in specimens that you acquire from a supply company, they're generally cut here and on the other side here, so that when you're ready to look at the internal anatomy, access is a lot easier. Shell. Now the shell, interestingly, has a bony inner structure and a keratinized outer structure. The outer surface is covered by these plate-like structures called scutes. And each scute actually has a name and a number. So if we take a look at the scutes first, what we'll find is that here in the center, this small scute right in the middle, right here, is the cervical scute. This row of scutes going right down the back are the vertebral scutes, and you number them starting with the number 1 at the anterior end. So these rows of scutes on the lateral edges out here are the pleural scutes, and they're also numbered starting with pleural scute number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then we have these scutes around the outer edge. This one right here in the middle, as I mentioned already, is the cervical scute, and the marginal scutes are also numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 in this animal. Now there are bones underlying these scutes that you can't see, but they also have specific names and locations. Let's look at the scutes of the plastron. So the plastron of this animal, again going anterior to posterior, these are gular scutes, then humeral scutes, these are pectoral scutes, abdominal scutes, femoral scutes or femoral scutes, and anal scutes. Now let's take a look at the external anatomy of the soft tissue and other structures aside from the shell. Let's start at the anterior end, and what we can see here on the head, very small openings, a pair right here. These are the nares, external nares. The eyes are located here, and the tympanic membrane is a little tougher to see. It's a circular structure on either side of the head that allows them to detect vibrations or hear. They don't have teeth. They have rather this bony beak-like structure that they use to tear off their food so they can swallow it. The neck is long and flexible. In the specimen that we have here, the muscles are largely contracted. Now the head is not completely contracted, but in most of our turtles, the bones of the neck, there are many of them, and they will bend into a dorsal ventral S shape that allows the animal to retract its head inside. Here we have a forelimb. The forelimb, as you can see, has 5 digits and long, sharp claws. Also, if you extend the digits away from each other, you can see that they also have webbed appendages that aids them in swimming, since these animals spend most of their time in the water. The posterior, or the hind limbs, are actually physically longer than the anterior or forelimbs. They also have long claws, webbed digits, and they're very good swimmers. The posterior end of the animal, I guess we'll just shift it this way. We have the muscular postanal tail right here, and this opening is not the anus. It's a structure called the cloaca. And a cloaca is an opening that more than one system of the body releases its material through. So this animal, through this single opening, would release its nitrogenous waste from the excretory system. It would release feces from the digestive system and reproductive material from the reproductive system. And that's a quick overview, introduction to the external anatomy of the red-eared turtle. All right, let's move on. So removing the plastron from your turtle is not a job for the faint of heart. So you're going to need some tools to do this. Just to let you know, some of the tools that I use when I do this: a broad-bladed screwdriver. You can insert into the cut and provide some leverage to help open up the cut a little bit. Some bone cutters. You'll need something that heavy duty. If you don't happen to have dedicated bone cutters, you can use other tools. For example, pair of small and large side cutters can be used to cut through the bony material. You'll need to do this on both sides of the plastron to cut through and make sure that you are able to separate entirely the bridge from anterior to posterior all the way. Now, just because you cut through the shell and that bony material in that shell does not mean it's going to come apart easily. So some other tools that I recommend: one is a scalpel. A pointed scalpel like this is really handy because you'll need to cut through the skin that connects the connections between, say, the appendages and the neck and the tail. All around the edge, you'll need to cut that in order to remove the plastron. But even then, you can't remove it because muscles are attached to the plastron. So another tool I highly recommend is a blunt tip probe like this one. And as you are able to separate the plastron even a little bit on one side, start to work this blunt tip probe from the edge in toward the center and separate everything that's connected, the soft tissue inside that's connected to the plastron. And once you're able to do that, you'll slowly be able to separate and pull the plastron apart, or not apart, but off of the turtle. Anyway, eventually you will be able to remove the plastron. So here's the plastron, and this white material that we see lining the plastron is a dense connective tissue, and it's very tough. You'd have a very hard time ripping it off, and this is the stuff you have to cut through along the edges with your scalpel in order to get access to the inner surface, and then scrape away from the edges on in. This kind of brownish material, this tan material, is muscle. And so anyway, if you do a good, careful job, you'll preserve a lot of the muscle attachments inside, so you can see the muscles in place. So here we have our turtle with the plastron removed. And there are a couple of prominent muscle groups that you'll be able to see. In the anterior end, these large muscles in here are, as you might expect, pectoral muscles. And you can see the attachment, the insertion point is up here, and they extend all the way down here, and they're also attached to the plastron. This side I wasn't able to separate as many of the muscles as I was over here, there would have been muscles extending down and inserting in here. So they use these large pectoral muscles to manipulate the forelimbs. In the posterior part of the body, down here, this pair of muscles, these are the oblique abdominis muscles. And aside from these two large sets of muscles, you can see there's not a lot else going on here in terms of musculature. Now, for most animals, we use larger abdominal muscles to hold the contents of the abdominal cavity in place, but these animals don't really need that because the plastron covers this area and provides very good support to the abdominal cavity inside. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to remove these muscles, I'm going to open up the abdominal cavity, and we'll start taking a look at the structures that are in there. Okay, with the peritoneum, that white tissue removed, let's take a look at what's inside. So over here on this part, so the pectoral muscle, which was here and here, have been removed. These muscles, which are still covered by a layer of peritoneum, are the deep muscles, or the muscles of the coracoid. And I'm not going to go into the detail of which ones are which, but there are multiple muscles in here, as you can see. And these bones and these muscles are all part of the pectoral girdle. On this side, all of the muscles have been removed, and we can see two bones. This bone right here is the coracoid, and this one is the precoracoid. Now, there's another bone that extends dorsally that you can't see in this preparation, and that is the scapula. So if we take a look at the soft tissue that's inside the abdominal cavity, so the abdominal cavity's been opened up, as has the pericardial cavity. So this is the pericardial cavity wall right here, and inside we have the heart. So we have a pair of atria, one ventricle, and then we have vessels coming and going from the ventricle. We'll look at those in more detail later on. These large lobes here are the liver, and there's a slight discoloration. The gallbladder is going to be down in here. We'll take a look at that later on as well. This large structure right here that's partially covered by the liver is the stomach. And then this long coiled structure winding its way around through here, filling most of the lower abdominal cavity is small intestine. And then we have right here, this is the urinary bladder. So the urinary bladder, the small intestine, and the reproductive system will all empty into a common opening, the cloaca, and the external opening of the cloaca is here. So that's what we can see so far. Let's do a little bit more preparation and look a little deeper. A few more things. So let's start with the heart. What we can see again is the left and right atria, the ventricle, the single ventricle, and then there are some large vessels that are coming out of the heart. This one, the first one on the right, is the pulmonary arch or pulmonary artery. This is going to carry blood to the lungs, which are not yet exposed. They are along the dorsal body wall. This vessel right here is the left aorta, which will come and arch around in this direction and supply blood to the body. This one right here is the subclavian artery that branches into the left and right subclavian arteries, supplying blood to the forelimbs. And then this vessel right here, which has been cut, is the right aorta. So remember, in these animals, they have a pair of aortae. One goes to the left and one goes to the right. Also, with this preparation, we can see some more detail of the structures of the neck. And so this long tubular structure right here, we have the trachea. And if you could physically touch this specimen, what you would be able to feel is these relatively robust cartilaginous rings in this structure that help keep the air passage open. This structure laying just dorsal to it or just underneath it is the esophagus that's going to come underneath here and lead to the stomach. And this structure right here is the muscle and vertebrae of the neck. And I'm going to turn the specimen a little bit so you can see it. Look how it is arched. So it's arched up like this, or ventrally, and then in this direction. This this turtle's head is partially withdrawn. And the way that this animal does that is that this will arch even more so ventrally and then dorsally to allow the head to be drawn back inside of the shell. So again, we've got the trachea, esophagus, and muscles and vertebrae of the neck. Look down here, what you can see is I have removed the left lobe of the liver, exposing the stomach. And this stomach has a very muscular structure, very muscular body wall, and of course is used to store and grind food. All right, so let me do a little more prep and we'll look at some more things. Okay, before we go any farther, I want to show you something. I've cut the trachea and inserted the tip of a plastic eyedropper, and there is a hole in one of the lungs, but what I'm going to do is just gently exhale into this and partially plug the hole and watch for the inflation of the lungs. The lungs are very large structures. Hopefully you saw the lung inflating as far down as this part of the abdominal cavity. The lungs are large organs that are dorsal along the inner surface of the carapace, about this big. And so anyway, we'll uncover those later on, but I wanted you to see that before we went any further. On the right lobe of the liver, if we roll it back, you can see that it's a dark brownish greenish organ right here. This is the gallbladder that produces the bile that's introduced into the upper part of the small intestine, and it helps with the breakdown of lipids. Over here, so here's the stomach, and then we have this organ right here. This is pancreas, which secretes digestive enzymes into the small intestine. So gallbladder right here, and pancreas, this large kind of cream-colored structure right here. Okay, I just removed the right lobe, the liver, the structure that was right up here. If we now take the small intestine, here we have actually, the stomach extends all the way this J shape until it turns the corner up here where the pyloric sphincter is. But if we roll this over to the side like so, this kind of mesh pattern material in here, this is the lung. And so this is the right lung that extends from all the way up here, all the way down here along the dorsal wall of the body cavity. And there, of course, is a left lung underneath the organs on the other side of the body as well. Okay, so the next thing I want to show you is the stomach. And I've opened the stomach, and this is what was inside. But if you look up here where you see these folds, this is where the esophagus joins the stomach. The stomach is kind of a J-shaped organ, this large storage area, and it turns the corner and comes up here past the area where the pancreas is located. This spot right here is where the bile duct was connected. This marks the upper end of the small intestine. So really from about this point on is going to be small intestine, winding its way all the way down toward the posterior end of the digestive tract. All right, you can see that some rather drastic changes have taken place. I've removed all the organs of the abdominal cavity and moved them aside. The heart and the pericardial cavity has been removed, as have the lungs. So let's just take a look at the lungs for a second. Here you can see the trachea, and then these large structures are the lungs. They have a surprising volume in them. But anyway, I just wanted you to be able to see that. So here are some things that I want to point out. So this structure right here is the posterior end of the digestive tract. And this structure is the urinary bladder. And if you notice, the urinary bladder empties into the digestive tract right here. On this side, these structures are part of the reproductive system. And on this side, I've removed the gonad, and this structure right here that you can see extending all the way down here and up here, this is the kidney. And the kidney will have connections to the urinary bladder. So now all the soft tissue from the abdominal cavity has been removed. And what we can see now are a few really interesting things. One is that, so if we zoom in a bit here, and if we look up here, we see these kind of whitish thread-like structures coming out of these spaces underneath this structure. Back here in the posterior part of the body, we can see them actually a lot more easily. These are nerves branching off of the spinal cord. The spinal cord is running through a set of openings underneath each of these connectives. Now, the other thing that's really interesting to note here is that we can see from the inside, looking from the inside, the actual bones that make up the carapace. And we can't see the ones in the middle because they're covered up. Actually, there's one at the very front. The bone at the very front is called the nuchal bone. And then there are a series of plates underneath this ridge, and those bones are the neural bones, and they're numbered 1 through however many you have here. And these bones out here on the sides, these are the costal bones, and they extend all the way out to the edge, well, near the edge, and then underlying the marginal scutes are marginal bones called the peripheral bones, and they're also numbered anterior to posterior. So if you notice right here, these connections, these bones are actually the ribs, and they're fused together to make the carapace of the shell. And the connections here, these would be fused, these are fused vertebrae, giving it a very rigid structure, and then the connections to the ribs coming off. So anyway, the turtle is a very interesting animal, and if you ever have a chance to take a look at one of these in a lab setting, it's really, really interesting stuff. So there you have it. The red-eared turtle, or red-eared slider, from top to bottom, front to back. I was going to say from inside out, but we actually did it from the outside in. And I hope that you enjoyed this, and thanks a lot for watching.